Note the disclaimer. A brief message before we begin. This video is not for the faint of heart, or those of a nervous disposition. Heavy topics will be discussed.
I believe it was a car driving over a railroad track loudly to hopefully induce a jump scare from the viewing audience, but that is just a really fucking stupid way to start your movie.
I bet I can think of worse. Also narration.
Also, how ironic. These people drove over the very railroad tracks that will factor into the death of their grandchildren 50 years later. Oh my god, that is positively Machiavellian.
First off, sinning irony. Secondly, yelling at the screen. Thirdly, watching ahead in the movie so you could get the background info already. Because how was anyone else supposed to know what would happen 50 years later aside from the screenwriters? Finally, misusing the term Machiavellian, since that's supposed to use manipulation, lack of morality, and self-interest to achieve a goal. All Death is doing here is killing people who weren't supposed to live after an initial disaster, and he doesn't care for worldly pleasures or issues.
Hey, you said you like surprises.
Yeah, I do, when I know what they are.
I've watched a lot of horror movies and I'm ridiculously tired of what passes as banter between couples while driving cars in these movies cliché.
To quote Grandy Tomias again, Jeremy invents a cliché that he'll only ever use for this one-time cliché.
The ghost of Johnny Cash would kill us if we played the song, but it's Ring of Fire, which is exactly what all these restaurant goers will be experiencing after this asshole kid throws a penny from the observation deck.
No, that's cute. You think Johnny Cash's ghost would know who you are? But seriously, you're narrating again.
Hey! Don't steal coins from the fountain. It's bad luck.
Getting reprimanded for stealing coins because it's bad luck, and not because Larry Smith was about to get lucky with Raquel Welch until his penny got pulled from the fountain.
I cannot roll my eyes any louder.
And even more impressive, the entire project was completed 5 months ahead of schedule.
Is that a good thing?
Iris would be excellent at restaurant construction sins.
That was a mouthful. But if you're saying that because she simply asked a question, then maybe she would fit in? Otherwise, she wouldn't be interested in the position.
Kids.
Okay, I'll grant you this one, because no one could tolerate this little a-hole. Once in, off.
We have a reservation. Campbell.
Oh, I'm sorry, but we're already over capacity for opening night. We cannot accommodate you.
With a restaurant that requires a several-minute elevator ride to the top, why aren't they checking the reservations on the ground floor? Because they fucking should be.
Maybe because that's where the restaurant is? I mean, where I live, there's the revolving restaurant at Rest Point, and the bookings there are always checked by the maitre d' by the entrance of the restaurant, never on the ground floor with other cafes, performance spaces, and everything. The guy is just refusing Paul and Iris simply because he's a pompous snob who doesn't view them as high-class material, even though Paul had initially made a booking.
Creme brulee shadowing.
Sinning foreshadowing. Is this all it's going to be for the review of this film?
This dance floor that says, "F you" to every acrophobic in existence.
Sinning the Space Needle. And while I am acrophobic, I could just stay away from the glass floor.
Don't throw that penny. It could kill somebody.
Oh, I'm so sorry, of course. Yeah. Fat ass.
I know this one already got a kid's sin, but he deserves at least 100 more. He might be the shittiest kid to ever shitty a shit movie or something. He sucks.
I'm torn. On the one hand, padding the sin count, and double dipping. On the other hand, this kid is utterly outright horrible, and I agree with the sin totals. I'll just leave it.
You mean with us?
Ruining a marriage proposal with a pregnancy announcement.
No. Paul actually said he was happy to hear it and still put the ring on her finger. If you think your significant other is endgame, you'd be willing to do anything with or for them.
Scene contains a shout, but does not contain an Animal House.
Just so you know, I'm not happy with this pop culture reference, and nor is the late John Belushi.
Abraham Lincoln.
Nope! Not going there. Okay, fine. Only because Alfred is actually a little shit, and people did actually cheer at his death.
I realize vector multiplication is scary, but it's not that scary.
And that statement isn't that funny, and yet many students laugh at it anyway, despite the fact that they just watched a fellow student having a meltdown in the middle of the lecture that would have had me looking for the exits.
You'd think a channel that tries to tell jokes would get sarcasm. Obviously not. And this kind of reaction is common in classrooms. In fact, during my first year of high school in an English class, the teacher made reference to the idiom, "You can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar," which I picked up on and responded with the classic Sheldon Cooper line,
You can catch even more flies with manure. What's your point?
and multiple students in that classroom erupted in laughter, and the teacher even shook my hand. Just saying, this isn't as out of place as you might think, Jeremy.
If the movie was going to show Stephanie waking up and screaming after her recurring nightmare in this scene, why did it bother showing her waking up and screaming in the middle of the class less than a minute ago?
You said it yourself. Recurring nightmare. Meaning continuous. She even says in that scene that the dream is ruining her life, which means that it's been going on for quite some time, and even with remedies it hasn't helped. That's why she woke up screaming in the classroom and in her dorm room.
So the woman in my dream, her name is Iris, right? That was my grandmother's name.
Based on this very flimsy reason, Stephanie will now embark on a journey to find her grandmother, even though she doesn't know what she looks like and can't verify the woman in the dream is her.
That's why she goes back to her hometown, to ask her family about Iris and find her that way, to get answers for the dream.
Either go home and find out about Grandma and hope that stops the dreams.
Why would that stop the dreams? Has therapy ever occurred to Stephanie even once?
Did you say that just because BetterHelp sponsored your video again? Like in Zootopia 2? That I provided a sin for on Vader's video? Is money influencing your decisions again? Insert name of politician here. But to answer your question, it probably has, but given the US Medical Board and healthcare spending, it wouldn't be cheap. And she's a college student, probably lives off of ramen packs and instant coffee.
Also, either death somehow gave Stephanie these nightmares so that she would get curious about them and find her grandmother so that she would let her guard down to finish the job, or death has an unexplained nemesis who is suddenly giving relatives nightmares instead of outright visions, a complete change in the franchise canon that needs an explanation right here, right now. Van Halen be damned!
First off, don't bring Van Halen into this, especially after sending the Isley brothers. Secondly, as for your rant, it was the former, because Iris wasn't meant to live after the tower disaster and has lived for 56 years after the fact, meaning she would have had to have put a stop to this somehow for the rest of her family tree to thrive. Meanwhile, Sam Lawton, Alex Browning, Wendy Christensen and Nick O'Bannon never got that chance. And similarly with the victims of the North Bay Bridge collapse, the Flight 180 explosion, the Route 23 pileup, the Devil's Flight roller coaster derailment, and the McKinley Speedway crash, with the only exceptions so far being Kimberly Corman and Thomas Burke from the pileup.
Driving. Having a partial vision while driving. Excitement?
Okay, cool your jets, TAC.
I just need to find Mom's mom, Iris.
Okay, yeah, that is weird.
Yes, agreed. Super weird someone would want to find their grandmother.
As the families go on to explain, they cut off contact with Iris due to her going mental over her children's safety.
I dreamed a hot dog ate me last night.
Movie chooses not to show us the dream where a hot dog ate Charlie, and I hate that I really want to see that.
Adam Stein and Zach Lepofsky probably didn't want to include that because they didn't want the movie taking too long and because it wasn't important to the story. Similarly for James Wong, the late David R. Ellis, and Stephen Quayle.
You know what? If you're going to have a move in a video game that is classified as a fatal blow, then the character on the receiving end of it shouldn't be alive anymore.
Sinning Mortal Kombat 1.
Entirely too much time focusing on the start button of this lawnmower that will one day kill Uncle Howard.
What's the matter? Scared of a little green button? Also sinning Foreshadowing.
Heist Beer makes several Easter egg appearances in this movie, and I'm wondering why a Final Destination focusing on Bloodlines didn't make it about the Heist family.
Because it's not important. It's an Easter egg based on stunt coordinator Freddie Heiss, just like in the second, third, fourth, and fifth films. Conflicting evidence on the first.
She started sending these horrible letters
that were full of obituaries and these disturbing pictures of dead bodies.
Oh, but don't worry. Despite your grandmother being a major source of pain to your aunt and me, and despite those letters being so terrible, we kept them in a box in a drawer for plot purposes.
Jeremy manipulates dialogue cliché.
In a movie filled with ominous signs of death everywhere, they saved the worst one for Stephanie's license plate.
Sinning the same number plate as Carter's Chevy Nova from the first film.
Also, this is where Iris chose to live so that she could avoid death more easily. But this is prime real estate for wildfires, which I am gobsmacked death hasn't tried on this property yet.
You make a good point. However, the point of this was for her to barricade herself from death, and it would be pointless for Death to start a wildfire if it was only her in the cabin. I mean, he fabricated an underground train derailment to get rid of Wendy, Kevin, and Julie, and gave Nick the mall explosion as a means of killing off him, his girlfriend Laurie, and their friend Janet, before just throwing a truck at them. Possibly even the Route 23 disaster thanks to Kimberly, Kat, Eugene, Burke, and Rory surviving their fates thanks to the Flight 180 survivors. If you were Death and you were going to make a big spectacle, then you'd probably need more than just one person present.
Empty your pockets. Phone, keys, everything.
If a phone or keys or anything else in her pockets can cause death, then her clothes can cause death too. Surprisingly, I'm not saying this to be perfect.
Oh, for sake, it wasn't enough that you made out that a t-shirt could kill Wendy in the third movie, and now this? And stop lying, you're being 100% pervy here.
These past 2 years have been absolutely magical.
There were clearly some ums and slight pauses the first time Paul went through this proposal to Iris. Movie doesn't know how to flash back to the flashback correctly.
This was her coming out of the premonition. 6 times I've had to explain this now, and you still don't f***ing get it? Not everything in premonition is going to be translated to real life, because she takes the penny from the little shit tossing them off the balcony, she covers a flambe pot with a cloche, and tells people to get off the dance floor before it breaks, saving every life in the Skyview Tower. So no, Paul won't have the exact same amount of pauses in his speech, just like Todd not having the exact same movements when he's telling Alex off for switching seats. The cans in the homeless lady's sack are going to fall later, Kevin will talk to the ride attendant differently, Samantha will have different dialogue for her kids to put tampons in their ears, or the bus falling off the bridge at a different time and angle to the premonition. It's not meant to be the same! Whew, I need a glass of water now for that one.
Death doesn't like it when you f*** with his plans.
This was not the tagline for any of the Final Destination movies.
Okay, fine, you win. It is a good tagline. Maybe it'll get used in Final Destination 7.
I see you, you f***.
This franchise has gotten to the point now where death is just a meta version of itself. It's as much of a nightmare killer as Freddy Krueger ever was. The main character in this one is literally dreaming the vision now. The characters are even talking to death now.
No, dumbass. Iris has gotten better at seeing the patterns and anticipating Death's next move after losing her husband Paul. Much like Alex in the first film after Todd, Terry and Miss Luton all died. Hell, her line delivery there is similar to Alex's when he holed himself up in Clear's cabin.
I see you, you f***.
Tried to capitalize, but I caught you. You f***.
And like I've said several times, death is omnipresent in these movies. Giving him a visage would completely ruin the supernatural illusion and just turn Final Destination into another slasher franchise. And speaking of slasher franchises, Nightmare on Elm Street called, they want their killer back.
The outside world is too dangerous. I haven't stepped out there in 20 years.
I know we're in a modern world where the groceries and necessities can come to you, but based on Iris's reluctance to even let her granddaughter through the front gate, how is she able to maneuver this daily routine with Amazon drivers and DoorDash?
Well, as we hear from William Bloodworth later, he helped her get some much-needed medical supplies for her cancer diagnosis. So it wouldn't be too out of left field to suggest he helped get more things to her door when he wasn't busy at work or warning other visionaries of their fates, with the exceptions of Wendy and Nick. Plus, have you ever heard of doomsday preppers? They're the most prepared for natural disasters and would have pantries filled with canned food. Most likely that's how Iris would be getting by after losing her husband and having her kids being taken away by the state.
You still don't believe me? Step back.
Iris hasn't stepped outside in 20 goddamn years and didn't even want to let her granddaughter through the front gate. But now she's willing to throw everything away just to prove to Stephanie that she's not full of shit. Do I think it's possible a grandmother would sacrifice herself for her granddaughter? Absolutely. Has this movie given me enough to make me believe it would happen in this moment? Absolutely not.
It's called proving a point, Louis Romero. Stephanie started to think coming to the cabin was a mistake after seeing the graphic scribbles and hearing the long-winded explanations of how to avoid death. So now Iris has to prove this to her, because otherwise Stephanie would have run off, she wouldn't impart her findings to the rest of the family, and everyone will just die still believing that Iris was an old nut job. And that just wouldn't be fun for the audience.
Seeing is believing.
Exactly, which is why I wonder why Death even wanted Stephanie to witness this.
Refer to the previous sin. Also, sinning the use of Ian McKinley's line from the third movie.
Yeah, well, seeing is believing.
And no, I'm not continuing the rest of this sin because it's him just speculating.
Hey, Steph. Her face really exploded right in front of you?
Just gonna sin myself for how much I kinda love Eric and want to be his friend.
Hey! That's my job!
I've watched, rewound, and rewatched this scene many times, and I can't figure out why Stephanie wants to talk to Professor Leo about a famous Batman comic.
I really can't tell if you're being sarcastic or not. But if you're not, then let me just ask, have you never received an email from someone you work with notifying you that they're in mourning? Death in the family means you're processing heavy grief due to the loss of a loved one, and therefore need time off from school or work to deal with the loss. So for this and the pop culture reference, 30 sins.
Breaking a glass on a sink filled with ice and not checking to see if any glass got in the sink full of ice. F***ing Bobby. Why can't you be more insensitive in a funny way like your brother Eric?
Because he isn't insensitive, just not attentive. Kind of like you when you're sinning movies. Though I do agree that the ice bucket should have been emptied and restocked with fresh ice, but then we wouldn't have had the moment of terror wondering who had the glass shard in their drink. Also sinning Bobby.
Seriously, this notebook that Iris apparently created and lived by to avoid death is goddamn useless to anyone else who reads it.
Even Stephanie? Who actually ends up seeing death coming and can work out his mechanisms?
It's okay.
Ah, I see Uncle Howard bought one of those lawnmowers where there are no safety features whatsoever.
All the better for Death to exact his plans, eh?
They are obituaries and articles for the people who were at the Skyview on the night that Iris had her premonition.
In every Final Destination movie, the chief protagonist is in a group where they know the victims.
Not true of the second and fourth films, which since you sinned those, I assume you would remember.
My next question is, why did Death take so long to kill the survivors at the restaurant, but especially Paul, who was an early victim?
Breathing room and false hope, like I explained for the previous films. As for this incident, Iris saved an incredibly large group of people, supposedly in the hundreds, whereas, including the Visionaries, Alex only saved 7, Kimberly saved 8, Wendy saved 10, Nick saved 10, and Sam saved 8 from their respective disasters. And if you're wondering why I'm not including full sins in this, it's due to Jeremy's explanations being too long for me to cover, and another example of why his older videos were better. Because instead of this meandering bullshit and constant pop culture references, college girlfriend jokes and other inappropriate comments, they were more succinct, shorter, and got to the point quicker. So for this one, expect a few cut downs.
Everything about this is setting up a classic Final Destination death, only it's one huge fake out, which means Death is orchestrating not only elaborate deaths, but elaborate cheats as well.
Agreed that this was a wasted exercise, but explained away later. So I'm just going to give you 1 sin for sinning this awesome sequence, and a further 5 for sinning Air Supply's cover of Without You.
Eric survives this.
We get it. You graduated from the redundancy school of being redundant. Stop shoving it in our faces.
My friend just said the tattoo parlor burned down last night.
Your friend told you that? Why didn't Eric tell you that, since he's still alive?
Spent the night in hospital, phone battery was dead, just wanted to be left alone. Just listing possible outcomes here.
Eric, just stay away from this truck.
Stephanie has officially become annoying, and I guess that's part of the message of this movie. You can't live life constantly being afraid of death. So, in other words, I think I just proved that Stephanie is the antagonist, and we should be seeing William Sadler's death drawing up murder blueprints at his workshop any minute now.
So what? You just hate Stephanie for being annoying? Even though she's trying to save people? The rest of the family are being the idiots here, saying her theory is bogus, and it ultimately ends up with Julia being dead.
What's amazing about this garbage truck is how it apparently no longer needs to make any stops along the road, even though it was regularly doing so just before this.
But we can see that there's no garbage bins on the footpath after the one that Julia was knocked into.
I got you! Don't worry, you're not next!
So in the next 9 seconds, let's not bother at all to get out of the way of the trash compactor, which should be really easy to do at this point.
Jeremy manipulates dialogue cliche.
Eric isn't Howard's biological son.
Which is weird because they cast an actor for Eric that looks very much like the actor who plays Howard. I guess Brenda had an affair with Howard's twin brother?
Nah, it was a bloke called Jerry Fenbury, because Howard and Darlene don't have another sibling. But you are right that it is weird that they look so much alike despite not being related. I'll just move on.
Darlene, please do not encourage this.
Does Marty not at least somewhat believe that Steph could be onto something here? Because if he doesn't, then I'm starting to think he's the worst parent in this scenario.
In this instance, possibly, but he wants his kids to be safe, which is impossible considering they're at the end of the list, with Marty and Brenda off scot-free.
Something River Hospital, Deep River, Peace River Hospital, Clear River.
If you think we're not going to send the name Clear River again, then welcome to the channel. You should stick around. I hear there will be brisket later.
I'll pass, thanks. And sending this Easter egg.
Is that what you think? That I didn't want to be your mom?
I'm pretty sure that's what every kid thinks when you abandon your child!
I was raised by a woman who taught me to see death everywhere.
I understand Iris trying to train her kids on finding death traps, but did she ever tell them that as long as she was alive, they'd be okay? She totally figured out death's hit list and what the rules were, so I'm surprised she didn't at least try to give them that solace. And if she didn't figure that out, why didn't she?
Okay, so I played those two sins back to back to show why they seemed contradictory to me. For one, Darlene left so she wouldn't be as much of a wreck as her mother was to her kids, even though Stephanie now hates her, despite the glaring hypocrisy that she left her brother Charlie and her best friend / cousin Julia for college. Darlene didn't want to abandon her kids, but had no other choice, and questioned whether or not she did the right thing. Iris, meanwhile, probably wouldn't have told her kids that they'd be safe if she was still alive, because she wouldn't have known how long she would have been alive for, and if she died in the middle of an "I'll stay alive for as long as I can" speech, like Darlene does later, it would have given Howard and Darlene quite a massive scare, and they might not be as careful, which still would have led to the two dying. So no, despite the large amount of pep talks, Iris and Darlene wouldn't have been able to face their family again, with the knowledge that something horrible was going to happen. With the only difference being Darlene was rambled to about it by Iris, and Iris had to witness it firsthand. So the only way was self-imposed exile. Like Alex Browning attempted in the first film, Clear Rivers succeeded in before the second film, and Nick and Laurie were contemplating in the fourth film.
William John Bloodworth, but my friends call me JB.
It's always nice to see Tony Todd, but did we really need an origin story of his character?
Oh, f*** you.
A young woman named Kimberly Corman found herself on death's list. She died, but her doctor managed to bring her back, and that broke the chain.
And then she went on to star in a successful TV show called Criminal Minds, and is back on it because they brought it back on a streaming service because that's what we do with IPs now.
Funny joke, but you're still manipulating dialogue here. And I thought we'd left the Criminal Minds references back during the Final Destination 2 video, but I guess not. So now I have to do what I have to do.
Also, how the f*** do you cheat death on a technicality? Why would death care that you came back from a flatlining?
Oh, of course! It's not enough that you make a Criminal Minds connection in the earlier sin, but now you exemplify that you didn't even pay attention to the second movie or Bloodworth's dialogue here. But in any case, if you're brought back from the brink of death, death won't chase you anymore. That's why Kimberly was off the list.
For years, people have been coming to me for advice. Well, I'm tired. I'm done with all that.
You never helped in any meaningful way one time!
Screaming at the late great Tony Todd! I hope you wake up in the morning and find 10,000 insects in your underwear, you horrid human being.
I intend to enjoy the time I have left. Life is precious. Enjoy every single second. You never know when.
Look, I'm not sure how close to death Tony Todd was in real life at this point, but just to think these were his last words on celluloid is so poignant and is making me tear up a bit. R.I.P., good sir, you brought so many of us years of joy on television and in the cinema.
Appreciate the 5 cents off, but too little too late, Mr. Scott.
There's a million ways to die in a hospital.
Please don't give Seth MacFarlane ideas, Stephanie.
Jeremy, Family Guy's on the phone. They want their actor, writer, and creator back.
Me and you, we are going to fix things for everyone right now.
But will they? Even if they save Bobby, wouldn't that just jump the chain to Darlene, Stephanie, and Charlie? Is Eric planning on killing each of them and resuscitating them too?
Again, no, dumbass. Just Bobby, because that will properly break the chain. If they just pulled Bobby away from a disaster, then Darlene would be next, and eventually it would circle back to him.
I would say this works, but considering it's a highly specialized piece of medical equipment, I'm going to go ahead and say nothing I've seen in this room actually works in a desired way.
Death is manipulating the tools here to get the outcome he desires. How is it you still don't understand this after doing 6 Final Destination films now?
As I see Eric's dick-piercing boner, I just realized that these Final Destination writing rooms must be even crazier than the Gremlins 2 writing room Key and Peele sketched out.
Actually, it kind of mellowed out on the gratuitous nudity after Final Destination 4, so you might be alone in thinking this is the craziest part of a movie franchise where death is getting even. Also, Jeremy says both dick and boner in the same sentence.
So much for death killing biological family members. What the f*** was that scene at the tattoo parlor?
The tattoo parlor scene was just to mess with Eric, and for now, Eric is interfering in Bobby's life and is now trying to get him out of the way. It's like Bloodworth said, if you f*** with death, things can get messy. Hell, Stephanie says as much later.
The sin is that James Bond isn't here to say, well, that's what I call a spring fling. Yes, that's dumb. Am I going to apologize for it? No.
Figured, but you really should apologise for that atrocious British accent you attempted. That doesn't butter my crumpets, old chap.
Why is Eric dead if he's not related to Iris?
When you f with death, things get messy.
Oh.
Oh, now you get it? Jeez. If it hadn't taken this long, I would have removed a sin. But after you started sinning Tony Todd, I'm not really feeling that generous today.
Nowhere is safe.
Except Iris's cabin.
You mean the cabin that Iris died at?
She only died because she went outside, and that was to prove a point to Stephanie. If you were actually paying attention to the movie and listening to the dialogue, you would have gotten that.
Watch out!
What the f*** was Darlene thinking here? Like, this isn't even a scenario Death dreamed up. This is just terrible driving.
I'm with you for the most part, but the laugh.
We could have seen this movie already for callbacks, and I guess we kind of did for the Clear Rivers one, but god damn it, this log truck is so f***ing annoyingly on point that I'm giving it 100 sins because I f***ing hate its existence.
Padding the sin count again, are we? Also, we'd prefer if you didn't sin the callbacks, unless they were egregious or poorly timed. Also, another script error, as it says then in the captions instead of that.
He's about to make a move. I don't know what it is.
Useful power that turned out to be. Fucking Stephanie.
Were you expecting 100% clairvoyance? She's not even a visionary!
Having faith that ramming into a gate with a trailer is not going to trigger some sort of death trap.
Calculated risk, Jeremy. Ever heard of those?
Don't wait for me. Just get inside.
This bullshit. In just a couple minutes after their mom dies and he nearly dies and Stephanie is nearly drowning, Charlie finds a knife to cut the seatbelt. Darlene isn't in any more danger now than she would be walking to the house without self-proclaimed death seer Stephanie. Find the knife now and cut her loose so she can help be the escort.
Are you yelling at the screen again? Dude, they can't hear you through the TV. Your words don't have any effect.
Entirely too much time spent on trying to make us believe Stephanie is dead here.
Subverting expectations, Jeremy. Ever heard of that?
Oh, it's a good thing Charlie told us he asked some girl out in the junior lifeguards earlier. That story wasn't just about potentially getting laid. It was laying the groundwork for his CPR skills. Anyway, after much consideration, I shall call this Chekhov's getting laid story.
Do my ears deceive me? Did Jeremy actually use a Chekhov's blank instead of a Deus Ex Machina? He did? Well, huzzah and hurrah! Took him 13 years, but he's finally done it! However, I wouldn't celebrate too soon, because despite showing the evidence of Charlie's involvement in junior lifeguards and using the correct phrase, he still should have A. removed a sin, or B. called it Chekhov's lifeguard training. Also, Jeremy says getting laid. Twice. In reference to a 17-year-old boy.
I'm glad the movie remembered Marty and Paco, because I did not.
Yeah, I don't care about Marty, but sinning Paco.
Jesus, why does Death have such a hard-on for this penny?
Jeremy says boner.
If you were unconscious and Charlie got you breathing again, then your heart didn't stop.
Wait a minute! Are we supposed to believe that Stephanie and Charlie thought that Stephanie was dead when he did CPR on her?
Yes.
Movie's crash scene is giving me way too many Speed 2 vibes.
Don't you mean Speed 1? Since the second movie focused on a cruise ship?
So Stephanie and Charlie die from giant logs getting Easter egged by one of the franchise's signature death objects. I'm beginning to think that logging should be banned in the Final Destination world.
You may have a point there, but you're technically sending Easter eggs and pointing things out on the screen.
Hold it, Your Honor. I have one thing to say about descent count. In remembrance of Tony Todd, add descent total from your Final Destination 1 video.
Also, to add on to what Vader said, add on the total from Final Destination 2 as well.
Also, since the voiceover world misses Tony Todd as well, add the total from Final Destination 3 on top of that.
Also, Final Destination 4, he wasn't there, but we're not going to forget him.
And while you're at it, add on the amount from Final Destination 5 as well, since you've seen it before.
Wowzers. Biggest count yet. Good luck to any other franchise for topping that.
You all, just be careful now. I'll see you soon. You have to follow the signs. Kimberly, life is precious. Enjoy every single second. You never know when. Good luck.
And with that, court is adjourned. Be sure to leave any more suggestions for CinemaSins down below, and I will see you all in the next video.